Certain critics of the MFA system have complained that simply the format of the writing workshop has been responsible for turning out generations of short story writers, because it is far easier to workshop a short story than it is to workshop a novel. So the short story form, despite having a terrible commercial market, is to some extent sustained by the MFA industrial complex. Whatever you think of that theory, it is true that certain formats favor certain forms. And one of the things I have learned while doing this podcast is that there are some types of writing it is easier to talk about in podcast form. So, for example, it's why we often talk about short essays, because the length of the essay combined with the presentation of the thesis makes for a kind of a digestible podcast episode length conversation. Less so novels. Though we do occasionally talk about novels, it's a little trickier. It's also a little trickier to have, because you're making an episode every week, or in some cases, in this case, every 2 weeks. It's hard. It's a taller order. So I sometimes have to explain this to prospective guests that I would love to read everything that you are suggesting we read in preparation for this conversation, but I can't do that times 2 episodes a week all the time. So all of which is to say that one of the things it is simply difficult to do in podcast form is discuss long poems. I don't mean epic poems, although that is also difficult. I really mean this sort of funny middle length of poem that is, longer than like 2 pages, maybe, right? Like longer than 2 pages, especially if we're talking the whole length of the page, it just starts to get to be a little cumbersome. Which is why, for the most part, I talk about short poems, or at least short-ish poems. So this week, I thought I would make an exception and talk about a single long poem. I will read the whole thing, but I think the way I'm going to do it is it's broken up into parts. So I'm going to talk about the poem as a whole. I'm going to read a few select parts that do stand alone, as well as working within the whole. And then at the end, I will read the whole thing from beginning to end. So if you are not, if you don't want to hear the whole thing all the way through, which will take a minute to do, then it'll be close to the end of the episode. You can just skip it. But it's a poem I have been thinking a lot about over the past few months, and it's one it's been on my mind a lot. I mean, this whole book has been very much on my mind, but with this poem in particular, I'm talking about Near the Summer Pavilion from The Sentence, which is the latest book by Maury Creech. It's came out from LSU Press last year, I think in the fall. And I don't think anybody has really written about it, but it is, of all the contemporary collections I've read in the last couple years, this is the one I've read. This is the one I've read most. I've reread it a number of times, and I've reread portions of it more than that. And not because it's a perfect masterpiece. Yeah, I said at one point in an essay about Maury's poems or about his books, that he doesn't tend to put out perfect books, because he's always trying something that he hasn't quite gotten his arms around yet. So he'll include among the gems some poems that represent something he's working on, and that maybe he will get more perfectly in a later book. But yeah, I'm not really a believer in collections. I'm a believer in individual poems. So this is a book that has a lot of individual poems I find interesting. And this poem, I think, most of all. So Near the Summer Pavilion is a crown of sonnets, sort of. And this was the first thing that really interested me about it when I realized what I was reading. So a crown of sonnets. This is an old form. It is 14 sonnets. So it is. I think is there a tradition to? I mean, I'm sure. I guess presumably it was originally. Yeah. This is like a very Italian concept. Like they do the. Is it the canzone they do, which is like that, just like horrifying frequency of repetition. So a crown of sonnets is 14 sonnets in which the first line of the sonnet, which the first line of the first sonnet is also the last line of the last sonnet. And all along the way, the last line of each sonnet is the first line of the next sonnet. So you get, if you read it all in a row, you end up hearing the same line twice in a row, over and over and over and over and over again, sort of in between at the edges of the sonnets, and then you hear the first line of the sonnet at the very end. If you happen to remember it, but at that point you're reading a crown of sonnets, so you go back and you look what was the first line, and so on. I have never been tempted to write a crown of sonnets. I've been even less tempted to write a heroic crown, which has a few other names, but including sonnet redoublé. There is, if you want to read a good sonnet redoublé, a good heroic sonnet, go to Literary Matters and read Alexis Sears' Crown for My Father, which is really moving. I think she handles the form well, and she handles it, I think, well in part by handling it a little bit lightly and loosely. She doesn't take herself or the form too seriously, and I think that is a saving grace. But yeah, that would be a heroic crown of sonnets to read. This is a crown of sonnets, but not in the usual way. And while it has become extremely fashionable in recent years to publish poems that are called sonnets, despite having almost none of the traditional qualities of a sonnet, I find that trend to be not impressive. I'm not offended. Like, there are certainly some 14-line unrhymed poems, unmetered unlined poems that are great. I mean, I believe it was Late Wife, the Claudia Emerson book that won the Pulitzer, some big prize. I think the middle sequence, the Late Wife sequence, which is really heartbreaking, I think those are like 14-line poems that I do not believe are even in meter, let alone rhyme. I think they're just sort of, iambic pentameter length-ish free verse lines. But like there are some great, and Terrence Hayes has some excellent poems in American Sonnet to My Past and Future Assassin. So I don't mind when people do that, but I don't find it to be like impressive or innovative. Like, it doesn't seem like, oh, you're reclaiming the sonnet. It just seems like, well, you're just like not following most of the rules of the sonnet. Same thing people do with guzzles, right? Guzzle being one of my least favorite forms that has been very fashionable for a number of years now. And in part, what becomes very tiresome and what I think leads a lot of people to crank out a gajillion guzzles, is that they drop some of the harder requirements of the guzzle, specifically the rhyme. So for the most part, simply like taking a poetic form and removing some of the constraints, like that can result in a good poem, but that doesn't strike me as like an intrinsically valuable thing to do. Just as I've said before that I don't find it like gratifying when somebody hides his rhyme under a bushel. Like, that doesn't seem like it's cool just cause. And it was one of the things I really appreciated about Karan and Shannon in I think it was the previous episode, the Against Literary Citizenship episode. I was either that or the second part, which is on The Secret Show, that they talked about liking forms that are actually recognizable as forms, like poems that look and sound like the forms that they are, rather than abandoning a lot of the things that make them hard. So, generally speaking, I don't I don't get excited simply at the news that somebody has dropped some formal constraints. But I think in this instance, near the Summer Pavilion, there's a really effective choice that Maury Creech makes in writing a crown of sonnets, but making life a whole lot easier on himself. And he does this in two ways. First, he drops the requirement that the last line of one sonnet has to be the first line of the next. So you don't hear those immediately repeated lines one-to-one in a row. And he also dropped the requirement that the first line be the last line. But then he took the convention from the heroic crown, which is the master sonnet that comes at the end. Oh, sorry, I forgot to describe the final requirement of a heroic sonnet or heroic crown. So a heroic crown is a regular crown. It has all of those requirements. It's 14 sonnets in a row with the lines repeating in just that way I mentioned. And then in addition to that, the 15th sonnet is the master sonnet, and that is the sonnet in which you take the first line of every previous sonnet in order, and you put those down, and those make up a sonnet that both makes sense and adheres to the rhyme scheme of the sonnet, of the same rhyme scheme you're using throughout the crown. So it is a devilishly difficult thing to do, particularly considering that those first lines are also the last lines of other sonnets, which means that you're just having to produce like insane quantities of rhymes for the same small number of sounds in order to make all of this stuff work correctly. It's the same reason, an Italian is famously a much easier language to rhyme in than English is, which is partly why they will give themselves steeper and steeper challenges to come up with more and more combinations of rhymes. English is a much harder language to rhyme in, and as a result, demanding that kind of extremity of repetition in rhymes, I think it's a fine line. There are some really wonderful Italian forms rendered into English very well. Among my very favorites are some of the earlier ones, including Thomas Wyatt, who imported the Italian sonnet form into English really beautifully. But I do think it can sometimes become kind of cramping. It is easy, as Alicia Solling said of a poem of mine, to smother a poem with too rigorous a form. So Maury, and I do know him, but he is another example of somebody I know through his work. So it's fun. Yeah, it's a funny. I think both of us feel this a little bit of unease. Like we've spoken a number of times. I've reviewed him a number of times. We've met twice, maybe ages and ages ago. But I think we both sort of like uneasily refer to the other person because we're on a first name basis, but kind of mostly through the work, really, which is a weird thing. But I think that by taking off the requirement of the repeating lines, he does himself a big favor. But then he imports the master sonnet from the heroic crown, even though his crown is just 14 sonnets. I know this is taking a while to explain, but it is, I think, worth it. His big innovation is very simple. He puts the master sonnet first. So the way this poem works is it's one sonnet, and then the first line of every subsequent sonnet in the sequence of 14 total, every subsequent sonnet beginning with the second line of the first poem. Each of those sonnets starts off with a line from the master sonnet, which means from the very beginning of the second sonnet, you're hearing repeated a line from the previous sonnet, but not back to back, as in a heroic crown. Instead, in this sort of funny, slightly uneasy way that creates a kind of an instantaneous nostalgia. And this is really appropriate to the poem because of the subject matter. So I'm gonna read the first sonnet now, and it'll start to give you a sense of start to give you a sense, I think, of what I'm talking about, because it is otherwise it is a very plain spoken poem. It is not ostentatious in its form, in its language, it is in its subject matter. It's all fairly soft spoken, but I think a lot is happening despite that. I apologize if my computer fan is being especially loud right now. It's because Alexis Sears Sonnet is just heating up my hard drive. I need to close that window so I can cool it down again. That's a weird thing to say about a sonnet for her father. That's with quality, not with sexiness. All right, so this is the first sonnet in Near the Summer Pavilion. The Summer Pavilion apparently is the name of a famous hotel or restaurant in Singapore. This is not that. This is in South Carolina, Garden City. The sun slants over the Kingfisher Hotel at 7 a.m. on Garden City Beach. Summer seems cradled in an oyster shell. The last 35 years stretch out of reach. You run 5 miles past tourist shops that sell painted sand dollars for $15 each, past fortune tellers with nothing much to tell, and a radio stammering on the edge of speech. As the half-moon flicks its ash into the sand, isn't this how it was when you were 10? And shirtless, wading waist-deep in the ocean? The minute hand has inched past the hour hand on the town hall clock. Now subsides to then. The morning smells of trash and suntan lotion. Yeah, it's only on the first that he does that. A, B, 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 A, B for the first 8 lines. It's broken up on the page into 2 quatrains and 2 tercets. In an Italian sonnet, the rhyme scheme is ABBA, ABBA, which links those first 8 lines all together into an octave, and then EFG, EFG, or something like that, sometimes with variation, for the sestet, right? Because the rhymes tell you what the units of the poem are. So that gives the poem these 2 units, the octave and the sestet. In an English sonnet, it's sometimes called a Shakespearean sonnet. There are, of course, other English sonnets. In an English sonnet, the rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. So what that ends up meaning is that you have 3 quatrains and a couplet, right? And Shakespeare's very famous for producing these sort of sharp closing couplets. And yet, to times in hope my verse shall stand, praising thy worth despite his cruel hand, right? Where you've got, for the first 12 lines, there's a little delay in the rhyme. You have to wait. You have to wait with an in-between line until you hear a rhyme come back, and then for the couplet, the rhyme's back to back. So you have a feeling of closure arriving. Maury's sonnet form here is one I don't totally recognize, and he varies it a little bit. The first sonnet is the only one that has that A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, and then the second quatrain is also A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B. So you have hotel, beach, shell, reach, sell, each, tell, speech. This is the only one where he's that rigorous in the first 2 quatrains. And then in the sestet, which he breaks into these 2 tercets, it's always EFG, but then the second chunk, the order varies. So in this one, it's EFG, EFG, but then in others, it's EFG, F, G, E. And in either case, even in the cases where it's EFG, EFG, it's the opposite motion from a Shakespearean sonnet, right? Where you, instead of the closing of the sonnet being a tighter rhyme than before, where the rhyme is closer together, the rhyme at the end of these sonnets gets farther apart. So there's a little bit of a feeling of dissolution, particularly when they're really spaced out by the out of order rhymes in the last tercet. So I think it's a nice it's a nice suiting of form to subject. The subject of this poem is one that I am so not a beach person. I'm really, really not a beach. I'm like barely a mountain person, but I'm really not a beach person. We did go to the beach this summer with the girls, and it was, or this spring with the girls, and it was fine. It was fine, Girls love it, and that's wonderful. But I do really, something about this subject really struck home, not because I like the beach, though I did go there, as a kid, pretty regularly. We went almost every summer for, some beach or another, often in South Carolina, but because of the way it deals with time. So the point, and the in the notes at the end of the book, he does say that he's basing the poem a little bit on John Cheever's, or it's inspired by John Cheever's story, The Swimmer, which is a great little short story, kind of classic John Cheever, sort of semi-surreal story about a guy who, in the hard-drinking, all-white suburbs of the 1970s, is it? I think it's kind of 1970s. That's why I always associate Cheever with the 70s, though that may be wrong. Oh, 64 is when it came out. All right, so mid 20th century. So it's a guy at a suburban pool party with his well-to-do high society friends one summer day, and he makes a decision to cheekily swim his way home by going pool to pool to pool all the way across the county till he reaches home. And over the course of the day, as he swims his way from pool to pool, things get stranger and darker, and the season starts to shift until by the time he gets home, it's the whole day has gone by and it's winter and his house is abandoned. And it's, and part of what the story does is it sort of, it freezes into, or it compresses into one day, a whole sequence of time by suggesting that, it would be as if he had gone to many, many different social occasions, and these were all compressed along with the years in between into a single day. And so you see the progress of his life from decadence to decay, all in the course of 12 pages. Here, it's something a little bit different and a little bit closer to experience that Morrie does. So the premise is that this guy who's a husband and dad, is at the beach with his wife and his sons, and this is not Morrie, but I'm sure there's some self-portraiture in here, but it's he doesn't have sons, and it is for various reasons. It's not quite him, and good. One is glad that it's not. It reminds me again of that fucking idiot who said that the British guy, who was wrong, who was right for the wrong reasons, the guy who thought that yes, Shakespeare was gay, but the reason he was gay was that what writer would choose a persona that was unattractive? Well, fucking, what are you talking about? But this is certainly a persona who has many flaws. But he's a dad at the beach with his wife and his sons, and he's a runner. He's going out in the morning to run. But this is also, as you hear in the very first sonnet, the last 35 years stretch out of reach. This is the same beach he's been coming to since he was a boy. And so he doesn't do what I did. The one time I committed the sin of publishing a sestina, which is another one of these nightmare forms. A sestina is 6 sestets and an envoy, a little tercet envoy. So it's 6 line stanzas and then a little 3-line stanza. And there's just an insane, horrifying kind of repetition of words that goes on throughout. But the way I did it is I called it anniversaries, and each stanza is another anniversary for the same couple. And that kind of helps to account for the repetition. Morrie does something, it's not quite as simple what he does here. So it's not what he's not quite doing. It's not quite that every sonnet in the sequence is a different year at the beach, right? Because that doesn't seem to be quite what it is. It may be sort of like every sonnet is a different day, and so it's like a 2-week vacation. So that may work out. Certainly, we do move across the course of a vacation, though taking a full 14 days at the beach seems like too much beach. That's too much beach, right? Though I guess they do get too much beach by the end of this. But even more than that progress of time, there is a very rich sense of all of the years of his own life stacked up in this one instance. And this is something I have felt since I was a boy, that, particularly in instances in which, you go to the same place at the same time of year over and over and over again, the experience, definitely the experience in memory, and sometimes even the experience in the moment, is that it's all linked together. Like there's a sort of a stitch running through time, linking all these summers together. I went to summer camp and experienced a lot of good and a lot of bad things there, but it was extremely memorable and intense, and my feeling was almost that I was two people, that there was the person I was when I was at camp and the person I was when I was not at camp. And it wasn't that those were like radically different personalities. It's just that they felt like different worlds. And every time I was back at camp, in part because of the things that were sort of scary or not great about it, my feeling was sort of resentment for the person I was during the school year, who thought fondly of camp and thought like, hey, I should go back to camp. And then while I was at camp, I would think, I'm back here. I'm still here. It's the same guy. I'm here again. I understand there's a TV show that makes use of this psychological experience or in some way, which sounds great. I haven't seen it. I can't say anything about it. But reading this poem, it just really felt like Morrie captured that sensation of being in the same place and time, both because there's a lot of repetition to your routine. The first sonnet in this sequence starts, the sun slants over the Kingfisher Hotel at 7 a.m. on the Garden Beach, and he's going on a run. The second sonnet begins at 7 a.m. on the Garden Beach. So you do have that feeling of starting the same day over again, not just on vacation, but in middle age. The kind of in my mind, because I kept forgetting the name of the sequence, because there's not, just because Summer Pavilion is not a landmark that I have close associations with. In my mind, the alternative name I had for this poem was the sand trap, and which is of course a golf term. Here's the thing. My dad did try to teach me golf out of his sense of like duty as a father, because he thought like it would be very important to my business career, because of course if you're like a middle-class white guy in America and you have a respectable professional career, then you need to know how to play golf, because that's where a lot of important social / business decisions and connections get made. And I was terrible at it and had no patience for it and didn't try enough and never learned at all. So lucky for him, I have no respectable professional career, and so I haven't needed it after all. But he did try to teach me, and a sand trap, of course, in golf is a patch of sand in the middle of a big grassy stretch where if your ball falls into it, it can be notoriously difficult to get it out, right? Because you slip in the sand, the ball slips in the sand, I guess you use a wedge to get it out. Your wedge slips in the sand, and it's very possible to burn off a lot of strokes trying to get a ball out of the sand. And certainly even once you get it out of the sand, then it's hard to get it into a good position on the green or on the course. So that is what sand trap means in general. But since this is not a term I'm using broadly, it's a term I'm using in my own head. In my own head, sand trap has a very different meaning. So what I think of when I hear the term sand trap is antlions. So antlions are they? I think they're arachnids. They're arthropods. They're insects. Their mature form, they look like kind of a weird dragonfly, but their larval form, they look like a horrible crab beetle. And when they're larvae, what they'll do is they'll dig in the sand and they will create a sand pit. So you can look this up, and it looks sort of like an inverted anthill, right? Like it's sort of round, and all the sides dip down to the middle, and there's sort of a divot in the middle, and the antlion traps its prey by building these little pits, and then the prey can't get out, and then the antlion comes out of the center of the pit, out of the sand, and drags its prey down and kills it. So I saw a a nature documentary. Like I saw a little clip in a nature documentary when I was a kid. This was on TV, and I was just absolutely mesmerized and horrified by the spectacle of the antlion and how it kills its prey. And so, in my mind, that is a sand trap, right? It's the sand you can't get out of is not a golfing inconvenience. It's an existential threat. You're trying to scrabble up the sides of this giant inverted cone in the sand while a horrifying prehistoric crab monster at the bottom bursts up out of the sand and drags you down to your sandy death. And that kind of Sisyphean struggle to get out while staying in the same place is what really came to mind with this image of the runner at the beach in this poem. It's also because I think I often have the feeling of being in a sand trap, particularly I think in middle age. There's a lot of repetition without progress to middle age, and a deep knowledge that at the bottom, at the end, when your struggle finally finishes, there's nothing but a crab monster waiting for you. So in my mind, this is a poem called The Sand Trap. But so here's the second sonnet. The main character's on a same daily run, it seems, and he's passing by some people who are coming home from their long nights out. They're just now going home. There's a reference to wings, capital W wings, which in this context is not the old TV show starring my college's childhood crush, who was also in that adaptation of The Shining. What's his name? Steven Weber. Steven Weber. My college girlfriend was in love with Steven Weber. So we're not talking about the Wings, the TV show. We're talking about a chain retail establishment that sells corny beach goods. Also like useful beach goods, but it's one of these places you'll see. I think it may be a Southern franchise, but there's a reference to Wings, and that's what he's talking about. So we get a little tour of the beach town. At 7 a.m. on Garden City Beach, the drunks are stumbling home with their regrets. You hear the mermaids singing each to each. They preen on the balconies of their sublets in American flag bikinis fresh from Wings. Your family's still asleep back at the rental, and you're alone with what the morning brings, though there's no use in getting sentimental. Haven't the summers here been much the same? They stream by like a banner behind a plane. Buckets and shovels, beach wagons and kites, and shower heads that rinse sand down a drain. Hangovers, funnel cakes, and arcade lights. The parents, then the children, with your name. So, of course, he is also echoing Eliot from the end of the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock when he says, you hear the mermaids singing each to each. But I think like that, the repetition of the second line of the first sonnet, as well as that little echo from Eliot, helps kind of prepare us to be hearing lines we've heard before. We're in the same context. We're seeing some of the same sights. We're in the middle of the same activity, but we get a glimpse of a little bit more of the beach town, including the people who are on the inverse of the speaker's journey. He's running out for a healthy early morning jog, and he's passing by people who are just now ending their night, stumbling home with their regrets. I'm not going to read all of these as we go through, but the speaker, the same activities get repeated day by day, but it's also the same. They have been coming here, and so the previous summer's activities are repeated or are echoed, as well as his childhood activities. We hear about when he was a boy, the way he looked at his dad. Of course, he is playing the role of the father. There's a nice little funny echo. There are a lot of echoes within the poem, within the bodies of the sonnets as well, which helps give a little extra connective tissue to the otherwise, structurally loose crown. There's a line, you think of him, his hand blocking the sun, right? That's the way that one does at the beach when the sun's too bright. This is the boy looking at his father. And then later, a couple sonnets later, there's a reference to when his dad used to carry him out into the waves, and the line is, you see him sun in his arms, S-O-N. So it's a play on words, but it's also just that the echo of the same figure returning, like memories do, as memories do, I should say. I'll skip to the seventh, which I think it's one I read to a writing group recently. I did a little spiel on sort of broken love poems, or disconnected love poems. I think I called it Love's Bystanders. The fortune tellers don't have much to tell. You met a girl in school and married her, then hunkered down a diver in a bell. The years from then to now are just a blur. You glimpse her leaning out on the deck rail and close your eyes. She's still the girl you knew, isn't she? Brown hair, willowy and pale. Sometimes you wonder what she thinks of you. As for the future, it'll look much like this, except you'll both be older, and she'll seem reserved somehow, more distant, like she keeps a secret to outlast your carelessness. This afternoon you'll watch her as she sleeps and reach for her, then leave her to her dream. This is, I think like it's a simple sonnet, but it's very elegant, very skillfully and subtly turned. One of the probably like the central tension, along with the feeling that he's sort of bound to the past. The other line that kept coming to mind reading this sonnet, this poem, the sequence, was the end of the Great Gatsby. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. So that also came to mind reading this. It is the main character, as he, as you can kind of imagine, as the crown progresses, he slowly trades places with the drunk stumbling home at 7 a.m. until he's getting lost in his own memories in the past, in his own failures. And it's not just, the summer 35 years ago when his dad was playing the role he is. It's also a couple years ago, as in this little poem 7, the future. There's another reference to the more recent past later that I'll get to, but I just think that this is a sonnet in which he says a lot very cleanly and simply and elegantly without showing off at all. The fortune tellers don't have much to tell. You met a girl in school and married her, then hunkered down a diver in a bell. The years from then to now are just a blur. That's even there. He summarizes his life in a couple lines. You met a girl in school and buried her. Sorry, Jesus Christ. Sorry, it's not that dark of a story. You met a girl in school and married her, then hunkered down, a diver in a bell. This summarizes his life. But it disguises what has happened very subtly by way of the form that he's chosen, right? Because that first sonnet is describing a scene in the present tense. The fortune tellers don't have much to tell. Past fortune tellers with nothing much to tell. He does slightly modify the lines in repetition, but most of them are pretty close to the same throughout. But it would be very easy for him to place that line into the past tense, but he doesn't. So that what he's actually saying here is the fortune tellers don't have much to tell, and then there's a colon, and then the example he gives is in the past. So it does seem as if all of the years in this place are fluid and seem to be happening at the same time. Right? So it's not just that he can't remember which year it is or whether he's one age or another. The things, the markers around him seem the same, even as he's changed. It's also that it has always been that way. It's not just that he's nostalgic now looking back. It's that in the past, looking forward, it also seemed as if he was stuck in the same place. Right? That nostalgia works in both directions. The fortune tellers don't have much to tell. You met a girl in school and married her, then hunkered down, a diver in a bell. The years from then to now are just a blur. They're a blur even in the grammar. Right? Like, even in explaining what happened, he slips from one time period into another. I think was it Craig Williamson who said time period is a redundancy. Nobody should. He has a good poem where he names all of the common redundant constructions that we use. I think time period is about, I should probably just say period. You glimpse her leaning out on the deck rail and close your eyes. This is, it's very, very subtle, very small thing, but it's like a real pet peeve of mine, is when people describe things in the wrong order, where they'll they'll take a physical attribute and they'll attach it to, they'll take sort of a modifier and they'll attach it to a subject, not in the order in which the narrator of the sentence would experience it. It's the same kind of mistake people make as when they are speaking from a character's perspective, and they will then say that character's face turned red. And it's like, it's a very small thing, but I always think like, well, but no, that's not her experience of it, right? She didn't see her face turn red. Her face went hot is what happened. Other people saw it turn red. But here it's very, very subtle, but he just, the information he provides comes in the right order. You glimpse her leaning out on the deck rail and close your eyes. She's still the girl you knew. So he has this thought, she's still the girl you knew, comma. He uses line breaks very, subtly but nicely. They're not big moves, but they are, I think, effective ones. She's still the girl you knew, comma, line break, isn't she? Brown hair, willowy and pale, right? So he sees her, then he closes his eyes, then he says, she's still the girl you knew, then he doubts what he said, isn't she? And then, with his eyes closed, he tries to imagine her as she was. Brown hair, willowy and pale, and it seems to be the same thing he saw a moment ago. And then, having just had this whole thought about her, she's the same. Then his thought, but he's reminded by that thought to think, sometimes you wonder what she thinks of you. Right? If I'm doing this as I look at her, what does she do when she looks at me? So it's like, it's very subtle, but it's just, he put the events in the right psychological order, right? So often people just sort of cram things in, and, in whatever order either makes the form work or sort of suits their ear best. And I just appreciate when people follow experience with their narration. As for the future, it'll look much like this, except we'll both be older. And she'll seem, another nice use of a line break, and she'll seem, line break, reserved somehow. Right? As if he has to think. As if he has to try to imagine, will she seem? And then the answer he comes up with is, I don't know. I won't know. Reserved somehow. More distant. Like she keeps, another line break, another good line break, keeps, because keeps on its own could mean is preserved, right? This, it's what I tell my daughters whenever they ask me to save something they're eating. I say, like, well, that won't keep. I can't save it, eat it. She keeps a secret to outlast your carelessness. That elaboration of like, I'm a mess. And there are things going on with her I don't even know about. And she doesn't even necessarily care for me to know about them. This afternoon, you'll watch her as she sleeps and reach for her, then leave her to her dream. Right? Almost make contact and then withdraw, decide not to. So it's a very, very quiet sonnet. Very little happens, no fireworks, but I think it really effectively evokes that slow, subtle distancing that can happen in a long-term relationship. The narrator kind of becomes more and more of a mess as the sonnets go on, as the poem goes on. Here, I'll read 8. This was not one of my very favorites, but I think it's helpful to give a sense of the poem's progression. A radio stammers on the edge of speech. Thunder is clearing its throat above the sea. The sun looks pale, like it's been soaked in bleach, where it hangs from the frond of a palmetto tree. Last night was quiet till you raised your voice. Your wife shushed you and wrinkled up her face, because, she said, you might wake up the boys, then locked herself in the bedroom just in case. Now things are pleasant, and the kids look fine, digging their heels in mud when the waves retreat. Your wife reads a paperback in a rusted chair, while you sip from a plastic solo cup of wine. You think to apologize, but you don't dare. Another wave collapses at your feet. A convention, I think it was Mary Jo Salter who sort of first pointed it out to me, but it is pretty true, is that even when you are writing with a regular meter, lines have a tendency to get longer as poems go on, and I always feel a slight disappointment with myself when I get to kind of a significant draft of a poem and I see that like, oh, the lines are really getting longer as it goes along, right? Because even when you've restricted yourself to a certain sonic length, we still try to we find ourselves cramming in more and more information to try to bring the poem to a satisfying close. And so it's particularly, I take a special delight when I see a poem ended well with a very short closing line, especially when there's a metrical component to it. So this is an example of that. This isn't my favorite poem overall of the set, though I do think that what's most effective about it is the juxtaposition between octave and sestet, right? Which is the memory of the fight from the night before, followed by now things are pleasant. Rather than carrying on logically the sort of the argument of the fight and trying to work out what that all means now, what happens is things get papered over, as they usually do when you're dealing with kids, and you have to move on and do other things. And like maybe there's still bad feelings lingering, but we just have to have another day now. Now things are pleasant and the kids look fine. Everything seems okay, but he knows they're not. And it's also, I think, just like really, really, really accurate logic. You think to apologize, but you don't dare. Right? Like you're going to do even more damage by not apologizing, but you're not apologizing because it feels like in the moment you would actually piss her off more if you apologized. And then he says, another wave collapses at your feet, and it's the shortest line in the whole poem. And it's, I think, a very, very effective one there. Another very small, but I think nice formal adjustment that he makes is that the two quatrains at the beginning of each sonnet are A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, again, except for that very first one, which is A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B. But then the sestets vary. So there is this tradition, and I don't know if it was made up, but I think it was Jake Riccafrente bringing it up in grad school, the tradition being that when you are writing in sestets, it is acceptable to change the rhyme scheme every stanza. Like, I don't know where that comes from or if it's true, but he claimed that when you're writing in sestets, you can just do like ABC in one, and then you can do AABBCC in the next one, and then like ABACCB in the third one if you want. And that is what Morey does with his sestets here. So they all begin EFG, but then they vary from there, and that variation, along with the more general spacing out of the rhyme and the sestets, adds to that feeling of dissolution and uneasy repetition, right? We do get the rhymes, but they come at greater distances and they come less predictably. So we feel a little more uncertain and uncomfortable. I'll skip ahead. Things get much worse. He ends up passing out and waking up on the beach, sunburnt, hungover a couple times, and eventually he moves out altogether. This is 13. On the town hall clock now subsides to then. You run to convince yourself it's just the summer. The realtor from next door asks where you've been, smiling and waving at you from his Hummer. You slept the last 2 nights at the Island Dunes Motel in Surfside. There's an ice machine and a pool with a diving board. You watch cartoons all day in your pajamas like a teen. You think of who you were 8 years ago. Modest, almost successful, calm, sincere. You thought you held the future in your hands, strolling the pier in swim trunks and Ray-Bans. Whatever happened to you happened slow. The window unit drones. You crack a beer. This is where I think the inspiration of the Cheever story comes through strongest, I think. Yeah, running into the neighbor. He's repeating himself. He's running you run to convince yourself it's just the summer. That he started out running And now he's doing it just to say like, hey, well, sure, things have gone to total shit, but it's just a shitty vacation. It's not a shitty life. I haven't fucked up everything. I haven't fucked up my marriage. I haven't fucked up my sons. I've just fucked up my vacation, right? The realtor from next door asks where you've been, smiling and waving at you from his Hummer. You feel that you know, what was initially when we first run into this guy, the realtor next door has new shares to sell. He grew up near your town. He knows your wife. And now the realtor hasn't changed. He's the same friendly guy waving from next door, or waving from his Hummer. But the distance now between him and the speaker is infinite. You watch cartoons all day in your pajamas like a teen. So we can't escape the past, and this is, I think, also very true, that there is in the worst parts of despairing middle age, especially for men, I think there is a kind of there's a rehearsal of adolescence there. But then the focus of this sonnet is not who he was 30 years ago, but who he was 8 years ago. Right? Just a slightly earlier version of himself. Modest, almost successful, calm, sincere. You thought you held the future in your hands, strolling the pier in swim trunks and Ray-Bans. And it's both a figure of envy, right, this person he used to be, and a figure of contempt, right? What a fool. What a fool that guy was. And one of my very favorite lines in the whole poem, whatever happened to you happened slow. Yeah, it's very true to thought. It's also true to speech. It is almost immeasurably better than if it were whatever happened to you happened slowly. Morrie is not usually someone who indulges in a lot of dialect for dialect's sake. He is a Southern poet, but he often writes in a way that is, I feel like his like natural poetic voice, it's not Southern and it's not, Northern or even like English. I feel like his natural poetic voice is like German in translation. It's like continental European. Yeah, there's something sometimes I think a little bit cold about him, but also like not without comedy, not without humor or self-deprecation, but reading a lot of books of poetry, to like contemporary books of poetry, the feeling I have, even when I read a book and I say like, hey, this poem's great, I very often have a feeling with the sort of the filler poems in between that like, come on, like stop dicking around. Like you're just dicking around with this. Why are you including this in a published book that I have to read? Like, don't just dick around. Come on, let's actually play for keeps here. Morrie is not always successful with his poems. He is always playing for keeps. I feel like his natural speaking voice is like Central European refugee writing in wartime. Like that feels kind of like him. Not speaking voice, but like, or not poetic voice, but like poetic perspective. But yeah, that whatever happened to you happened slow. It's just right, and it is very, it does sound like the South. I'll read the last poem, the last sonnet of the set, which includes a line that I think is sort of the thesis statement of the whole poem, and is a line that, when I read the very first time I read it, I underlined it. I thought like, yes, I know this exactly. All right, so this is the last sonnet in the set. The first line, the first line of it is the last line of the first poem. The morning smells of trash and suntan lotion, but it's too late to dwell on imperfections. You run out past the condos by the ocean, past cheap rides and kiosks that sell confections, and stores with souvenir shot glasses on a shelf. Reflected in the window, you're your dad for a moment, then a stranger, then yourself. The whole thing seems more ridiculous than sad. You stare at an umber smutch beyond the pier. A seagull, hefting a French fry in its beak, struts in the sand beside a garbage bin. It's always been this summer, every year. The salt wind off the sea still chafes your cheek. You'll head back home. The waves keep coming in. Yeah, so of course it's always been this summer every year. does feel like the central truth of the poem, and it is one that absolutely struck a nerve with me. I do think this poem contains this sonnet in particular contains a nice. It's like a shibboleth to determine if you are a Cameron or you're a me. Because my guess is that it would be one of Cameron's favorite moments, and it's a moment that feels a little funny in my ear. So you stare at an umber smutch beyond the pier. Umber is a color that is, I believe umber, it's got to come from umbra, right? The word for shadow in Latin. But it's a word for a dark ochre. Of course, burnt umber is that sort of like deep reddish brownish color that we all remember, the Crayola crayon with the burnt umber printed on the side. An umber smutch, and a smutch is sort of like a smudge, sort of like a little. I think of a smutch as almost being like a little daub of paint, like there's smutches in Bob Ross videos. You stare at an umber smutch beyond the pier, right? Something that's either because it's so far away or because your eyes aren't that good. It's all you can see, but it is there. It is something. And it seems like a very apt description and a very rich phrase. It sounds great. It's very evocative. And yet, while I imagine it would very much please Cameron and a lot of other very good readers, my slight objection to it is just that's nobody's voice, right? Just as Whatever Happened to You Happened Slow feels so credible as a speech, Umber Smutch feels a little funny, just a little alien. The same way I think elsewhere in the book, not in this poem, but in another poem, he uses dough to refer to money, and it's a rhyme word. And I thought, like, reading that, I just thought, like, well, but nobody says that. Like, nobody, like, that's not anybody's voice speaking. But those are actually quite rare moments. For the most part, he is his English is very speakable, very credible. And the last line is, it's exactly the kind of devastating simplicity I really envy in the poems that I love most. You'll head back home. The waves keep coming in. He doesn't need to explain how these motions are parallel and opposite. He just states them. You'll head back home. You're going back to the place where you live, where you always are, even though while you're here, you're always here. The waves will keep doing what they do, and you can't escape. This poem, as well as there's another poem in this book called The Road, which is also written in sections, and they both, the other kind of voice I heard haunting these poems was Mr. Flood's Party, which is, of course, one of my very favorites by E.A. Robinson. So this is Near the Summer Pavilion. I really love it. It's a good book, and this is the poem that feels like, in a funny way, not necessarily even the heart of the book, but a heart. I will read it again. I meant to stop like 10 minutes in and introduce the show, and I fucking didn't. And so if you happen to have listened to this long and not known what you were listening to, I am Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. If you like this, please subscribe to The Secret Show. Go to sleerickets.substack.com. Or what you can do, and what I've had in place for a long time, is you can just go to sleerickets.com, and that will take you to my website, and that's the front page, and it just has links to everything. So sleerickets.com, you will see links to everything. If you just look at the upper banner, upper row of the website, they're just words for everything you need there, including a big picture of my book. So click on the picture. Buy my book from Bookshop or from fucking anywhere. What else? I will be in New York, like in a week and a half. So May 19th, I will be at Sweet NYC. It's Sweet, a bar in Morningside Heights. It is a gay bar, as every map will tell you. I will be there. Ryan Wilson is headlining. Rachel Hadas, Grace Schulman, Chris Childers, Joshua Megan, and I will be opening collectively for Ryan, but it should be a lot of great people there. It is at 3 p.m., which is a very weird time. It's at 3 p.m. Sunday, May 19th at Sweet NYC in Morningside Heights, and I almost certainly go get like drinks and food afterward. I assume. I don't know. but like come hang out and be SLEERICKETS people there. I think like that should be fun. So come do that. Oh, I may. So the main feed. I apologize, by the way. I missed last week, and I missed it, as I said, on the Secret Show because I've been working on some prose stuff. But the main show is going to go on hiatus for a few weeks. The Secret Show will continue on, so do sign up at SLEERICKETS.substack.com. It's pretty fucking cheap, and you can check some out for free. There are also like various like funny little deals you can do where if you subscribe for free, then it'll let you like unlock an episode and listen to it occasionally without paying. And there are various other little like perks and tricks. And I've activated I've clicked on all of them to turn them on. So I don't even know what they all are, but there are various ways you can even listen without paying if you go in there and jump through a hoop or two. So go check that out. I have maybe some more news, Secret Show news coming up. Well, I'll go ahead and say it here because I don't know if I want to do intros for each one. But so what I may do while the main feed is down, you should still go sign up for the Secret Show anyway. But while the main feed is on hiatus, I have asked regular subscribers to the Secret Show for some of their favorite episodes, some of the episodes they would like the broader audience to get to hear, and they have made suggestions. So what I may do during the hiatus is unlock some of those episodes and release them on the main feed, so you can hear some of the weird shit we get into in the Secret Show. And go check it out. And there should be, I think there's like I think I just did 90 or 91 up now. So there's a lot on there. And it is I need to go re-listen to all those episodes because it is also where things get a lot less guarded. And there's certainly some that will never be made public. But I think at least some of the ones that they suggested, I should be able to release publicly. And it should, maybe that'll be fun. But come see Ryan, Josh, Grace, Rachel, Chris, and me at Sweet. I always want it like another like Sweet Bar or Sweet. I think I'm saying Sweet NYC because I see it written sometimes that way, but I think it's just called Sweet. Come see us there. Come listen to some poems, and then in June I will be in Cleveland with Ryan and George David Clark and Elijah and a couple other SLEERICKETS tiers. Oh God, don't do. Oh, that's terrible. No, let's not use that. Let's not have that be a thing. Other SLEERICKETS affiliated people will be there, so that'll be fun as well. But come have a mini SLEERICKETS conference in New York, and then another one in Cleveland, and some more after that in other places yet to be decided and announced. All right. Thank you all for listening. I'm going to read the whole poem once, straight through from beginning to end, and then I will just let that be that. No, wait. So I will include a little at the very end after I read the poem. I will include a little preview from the most recent Secret Show episode, which was a really fun. It was the second half, the slightly loopier second half of my conversation with Karan and Shannon, which was very fun, and they got into some interesting and thorny questions. All right. Here is Near the Summer Pavilion by Maury Creech. Go by the sentence. Yeah, go by the sentence. All right. Near the Summer Pavilion. 1. The sun slants over the Kingfisher Hotel. At 7 a.m. on Garden City Beach, summer seems cradled in an oyster shell. The last 35 years stretch out of reach. You run 5 miles past tourist shops that sell painted sand dollars for $15 each, past fortune tellers with nothing much to tell, and a radio stammering on the edge of speech. As the half moon flicks its ash into the sand, isn't this how it was when you were 10? And shirtless, wading waist deep in the ocean? The minute hand has inched past the hour hand on the town hall clock. Now subsides to then. The morning smells of trash and suntan lotion. 2. At 7 a.m. on Garden City Beach, the drunks are stumbling home with their regrets. You hear the mermaids singing each to each. They preen on the balconies of their sublets in American flag bikinis fresh from wings. Your family's still asleep back at the rental, and you're alone with what the morning brings, though there's no use in getting sentimental. Haven't the summers here been much the same? They stream by like a banner behind a plane. Buckets and shovels, beach wagons and kites, and shower heads that rinse sand down a drain. Hangovers, funnel cakes, and arcade lights. The parents, then the children, with your name. 3. Summer seems cradled in an oyster shell that time pries open with a shucking knife. The realtor next door has new shares to sell. He grew up near your town. He knows your wife. You tell him you grew up here, in a way, collecting shells and swimming in the creek. A cloud has turned the sky gunmetal gray. You ask about the forecast for the week, but get no answer. It rains here every year. Once, when you were 12, it rained for days, and you read Tolkien novels in the bed, while your dad paced the rec room with a beer, tracing his thumb on the pool table's bays. It's calm now, but it's storming in your head. 4. The last 35 years stretch out of reach, like a kite string raveling out in summer winds. At dawn, the low sun ripens like a peach. Your joints ache, like a diver's with the bends. You spent last night out drinking on the deck, with your neighbor, a chiropractor from Fort Wayne, then woke with a fishing net around your neck. Your head throbs to the breaker's far refrain. Each evening ends up pretty much like this. The sea stacks up the days. You knock them down. Till there are just a few postcards, souvenirs, or lies you swap with strangers over beers. Sunrise puts on the colors of a clown. You stumble toward the dock to take a piss. 5. You run 5 miles past tourist shops that sell your childhood, t-shirts, hermit crabs, shark teeth. Summers seem fine at first, until the smell prompts you to look and see what's underneath. Cut to the queasy mornings, quarrels, rain, the tilt-a-whirl operator's crooked smile. Each dawn your eyes fix on the water stain, like a Rorschach blot across the ceiling tile, until you find the strength to lace your shoes. But once you're out here jogging on the strand, you're persuaded by the morning's garish sprawl, the Ferris wheel looming above the sand, and the wind tumbling over a child's beach ball. On the sea, a lone cloud darkens like a bruise. 6. Painted sand dollars at $15 each. The boardwalk's whiff of hot dogs and cheap beer. A shuttered surf shop where they used to teach out-of-towners to kayak past the pier. Horizons stretched flat as a straight-edge razor, above which doze the same thick plumes of cloud. Bicycle cop, right hand perched on his taser. The pool, no cursing, diving not allowed. When did your parents first start taking you here? And why did they come back every summer? And won't your kids be asking the same thing in 10 years? Won't the answer still be true? You lean in the salt wind to feel the sting. With every gust, your face keeps getting number. 7. The fortune tellers don't have much to tell. You met a girl in school and married her, then hunkered down, a diver in a bell. The years from then to now are just a blur. You glimpse her leaning out on the deck rail and close your eyes. She's still the girl you knew, isn't she? Brown hair, willowy and pale. Sometimes you wonder what she thinks of you. As for the future, it'll look much like this, except you'll both be older, and she'll seem reserved somehow, more distant. Like she keeps a secret to outlast your carelessness. This afternoon you'll watch her as she sleeps and reach for her, then leave her to her dream. 8. A radio stammers on the edge of speech. Thunder is clearing its throat above the sea. The sun looks pale, like it's been soaked in bleach where it hangs from the frond of a palmetto tree. Last night was quiet till you raised your voice. Your wife shushed you and wrinkled up her face because she said you might wake up the boys, then locked herself in the bedroom just in case. Now things are pleasant, and the kids look fine, digging their heels in mud when the waves retreat. Your wife reads a paper book in a rusted chair while you sip from a plastic solo cup of wine. You think to apologize, but you don't dare. Another wave collapses at your feet. 9. While a half moon flicks its ash into the sand, you sit in a rocking chair and watch the breeze wrinkle the inlet, half drunk and suntanned, with a map of Myrtle Beach across your knees. What will it be today, you ask? Putt-putt? Or a day trip out to Ripley's Believe It or Not? Your wife scowls at you. A screen door slams shut. It's 9 o'clock in the morning and too hot. Your father used to herd you to the car on some grim errand, then, in the name of fun, head to the amusement park and let you ride, turning you into the father that you are. You think of him, his hand blocking the sun, thrilled just to hear the bumper cars collide. 10. This isn't how it was when you were 10. Face down in a sand dune with a blistered back at 11 a.m., you don't know where you've been. A bar, 6 bourbon shots, beer, fade to black. You walk the quarter-mile back to your house, trailing a busted flip-flop from your heel, to hear your wife, exhausted, fume and grouse while you try to play it off like no big deal. As you pass the pier, a woman looks at you. Somebody that you met the night before? The light chews at your eyes, your head's on fire. If you don't remember it, you're not a liar, you think the minute you walk through the door. The story you tell isn't honest, but it's true. 11. Shirtless, you wade waist deep into the ocean while your 7-year-old rides a boogie board. He wants to go out deep past the commotion. You say 1 minute, but by then you're bored. Your own father once took you on his shoulders out past the tide line where the sea was calm. You squint back at the beach. The sun smolders, stuck like a frisbee in some ragged palm. Later, you'll put your feet up, watch TV in one of a dozen houses that you've rented over the years, and think, I'm not my father. You see him, son in his arms, breasting the sea, like parenthood was something he invented. After the next wave, you say, but you won't bother. 12. The minute hand has inched past the hour hand. Butch plus Amanda banged here 2016, scrawled in a porta-john out past the Strand, reminds you no one's hands are ever clean, no matter how much soap they lather on. The moon's a seashell on some motel sign, a tinsel decoration for the dawn. Sun bobs like a cork on the horizon line. You run to sweat the night out of your pores past houses lined like rows of old mistakes that greet you every morning when you rise. The repetition still won't make you wise, no matter all the breaths or miles it takes to find the address you'll recognize as yours. 13. On the town hall clock now subsides to then. You run to convince yourself it's just the summer. The realtor from next door asks where you've been, smiling and waving at you from his Hummer. You slept the last 2 nights at the Island Dunes Motel in Surfside. There's an ice machine and a pool with a diving board. You watch cartoons all day in your pajamas like a teen. You think of who you were 8 years ago. Modest, almost successful, calm, sincere. You thought you held the future in your hands, strolling the pier in swim trunks and Ray-Bans. Whatever happened to you happened slow. The window unit drones. You crack a beer. 14. The morning smells of trash and suntan lotion, but it's too late to dwell on imperfections. You run out past the condos by the ocean, past cheap rides and kiosks that sell confections, and stores with souvenir shot glasses on a shelf. Reflected in the window, you're your dad for a moment, then a stranger, then yourself. The whole thing seems more ridiculous than sad. You stare at an umber smutch beyond the pier. A seagull, hefting a French fry in its beak, struts in the sand beside a garbage bin. It's always been this summer, every year. The salt wind off the sea still chafes your cheek. You'll head back home. The waves keep coming in. That's Near the Summer Pavilion by Maury Creech from The Sentence. All right, thank you all for listening. You can reach me, as always, at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com, and with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Well, I mean, relatively soon. Soon enough. All right, here's a quick preview of, I think it's not the most recent, but a recent Secret Show episode. I made a list of some of the problems I thought come up in poetry magazines, and I was curious just to hear how y'all might respond to some of them, if you don't mind, if I might try to run through and just see too many shitty submissions. They're like at a certain, like sometimes it can get to be so many that it's almost unmanageable. That has not been a problem for y'all so far, or?
That's always true for all magazines, I think.
We didn't realize it would be a problem. We thought we wouldn't get any submissions.
Right.
I think Authors Publish posted about us, so I think that helped a lot. But
in the beginning,
I think
but ever since then, it's been a steady 2,000, over 2,000 a month.
Yeah, submissions.
Yeah,
2,000,
and nobody,
2,000.
and when we tell people that, people are like, "Oh, really?" Because it seems like it's a big number.
It was like 1 month where I was like, "Oh, now it's because we're free for the first 7 days of the month." I was like, "Okay, I'm just gonna now do like the routine social media." I was like, "Don't post it.
Don't even announce.
There's too many."
Sometimes we don't even announce our calls because we're like, wow, this is just it. Sometimes it gets just too much, and we're just like two people who are doing everything. But we've just recently got some readers, so now we hopefully won't have to face that problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is a real problem, and right now the solution is you've got some readers to help. Do they filter for you? How does that work? Or do you want to clarify?
Before that, I want to say that it's probably not a problem. It's actually a good thing that so many people send poetry, even if it's bad, because so I feel the problem here is that are those people actually reading?
Right.
Because we want those 2,000 people who submit to us. We also want them to be readers, and not just readers of our magazines, but readers in general. I see that people sometimes, especially people who write bad poetry, they often do so because they don't read enough.
Yeah.
But also, there's been some poets who've written not the best poems, but you have maintained, you still maintain connections because something about their cover letter or their poetry really touched you, and they are readers as well.
Yes.
So I think
it's easy to connect with a reader than it is to with a writer. Is just the way I think.
Yeah.
I think that's they're better listeners for one thing.
Writers are difficult people.
Salman Rushdie, he said that if I enter a house
cool.
I don't see any books there, I leave very quickly. I start feeling nervous and leave very quickly.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. Or I wonder, like, well, where are they? Are you hiding them? Are they upstairs?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
And if so, why?
You were asking something else too. I
Yeah,
think
well, yeah. So if you like it, because even if it is good news in general that you have a lot of submissions, it can become a problem just of management. Particularly if
right.
it's just two
Oh
people
no,
reading. So you got some help with the readers.
certainly, yeah. It's been like we put out a call for readers. We got like 100 applications, and 50 of them were like fantastic. I wanted all of them to come and
Yeah.
give me a hug, but we had to. Our managing editor, Justine, who's our good friend, she said it's very difficult to manage so many people. Let's just
Yeah.
bring the number down to 20, which was a high.
10.
But I
She was
tried
like
to convince because I'm
20,
like
20.
the more the merrier sort of thing. So we got 20 readers. I had
Also, he had 30-minute long conversations with every reader,
Oh
like
my
about
God.
their lives. Like,
You are
that's
like
just
the Agni editor. That's insane.
so yeah, it's just if I'm gonna be working with somebody, I better at least know how they look or how they speak, how their voice sounds like,
Sure, yeah.
So just it's just that,
readers have helped a lot.
and the readers are so wonderful, such nice people, all of them, and yeah, it's just fantastic.
How does it work? Like what's a poem
I,
comes into the slush pile, what happens?
Yeah, a poem comes in, Kay first looks at it, and then he assigns it. So he knows the readers really well. So he'll
Okay.
assign specific things that he sees. He'll assign that to 2 or 3 other readers.
yeah, so it's like we get a batch of 10 pages by everybody, so I assign 20 submissions to every reader every Monday, and
Okay.
they mark a yes if it's a yes, and if it's like an emphatic yes, I tell them to just email me so that I can look at it right away or whatever, or they put a note, put a message, and then now we have switched to like a review method, which is like a thumbs up or
Thumbs
thumbs
up,
down.
this one, or a down.
Yeah.
So if all 3 of them have set it down, then Kay will still take a really quick glance
Just
to
to confirm that it's us.
but it'll be an
Right.
it'll be an easy form rejection. If it's like
Yeah.
then there'll be some conversation. If it's thumbs up, then there'll be a longer process, and usually
Okay.
Kay will end up with a bunch of submissions that he really likes, and then he'll send them to me to read.
Yeah.
Um,
Then we'll read them together. Sometimes if they have moved up a stage, sometimes we'd stay with them. We would not respond. We'd go again, read them over again.
Kay will ask
some sort of space.
So then sometimes he'll have 40 pages of poems from one poet.
Because if I like a poet and I'm like,
Oh,
so for instance, if somebody
so the submission doesn't have to have a ton of poems in it. If you read poems you like, you'll ask for more. That's how it works.
I do that.
Okay.
I think more often than I
We
should.
ask them to send up to 10 pages, but very often, if Kay likes somebody, he'll say, send me 10 more or send me 20 more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I also like it's clear in our ethos that we are publishing poets, not poems. Sometimes I see that this poet is good, but these poems are not working for me or they're not there yet. I want to see more so I can like pick the best ones that I think are the best ones. So kind of like that.
And a couple of times also we've though we mostly published previously unpublished stuff, but a few times just to make the portfolio kind of what we want, we have published previously published as well. So that's another small way, I guess, for us that we've thought to be accessible, which people seem to appreciate. It's like, so what that it was published in print 8 years ago in whatever review.
Most people are going to be seeing it in your magazine for the first time. It's not like it's lost its virginity, which is how people have treated these things for a long time.
Yeah, precisely. And why?
I whispered this poem in the shower. Can I still
publish it? That's funny.
But that's how it's become. It feels ridiculous.
Yeah. That was an excerpt from a recent Secret Show episode. To hear the rest of that conversation, go to SLEERICKETS.substack.com and sign up for the Secret Show. It is pretty fucking cheap. I think that's it. I will see you after the hiatus, or if you subscribe to the Secret Show, then I'll see you fucking in a few days. All right, bye now.